Good morning, everyone. Today is Friday, February 28th. It is 8:47 a.m. This is House Commerce and Economic Development. We are here this morning with our intern, Helen Hargraves. Good morning, Helen.
Morning, everyone, again. For the record, my name is Helen Hargraves. I am the legislative intern for the committee this session, and a UVM senior. This week, I will again be reporting on the Senate Committee on Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs. I had an exam yesterday, which is when the majority of the action went down. So I'm able to speak really in depth up to a certain point and then give sort of a broader overview on the last bits. But I'm also happy to make or put together a more detailed report if you guys need that on those pieces. But starting off, an overview of the week for the committee. They're like the rest of the committees, they're on crunch time. Their goal is to get 3 committee bills out of committee. Economic development bill, what I believe is a overarching labor bill, and a housing bill. We went over the economic development bill and the labor pieces this week. And I think their goal to be finished is by March 14th. See. So getting started, the draft development bill, they had a very thorough run through on Wednesday. After hearing testimony from several small business advocates who came to speak with you, I think a couple weeks ago. So they had them back to discuss requests to be put into this bill specifically. So the second section of this bill is devoted to those asks. And it essentially appropriates $300,000 to the Department of Economic Development for the Vermont Law and Graduate School, to support small businesses with their legal counseling. Professionals of Color Network requests $350,000 to the Department of Economic Development, which is $100,000 beyond what's in the governor's budget. That's in order to add to their workforce and business development services to meet increasing demand. And that's also to allow them to provide business technical assistance services and expand those, because as they discussed when they met a week or two ago with the committee, their demand is exceeding what they have to provide at this point. $688,889 is appropriated to Small Business Development Center in this bill. $300,000 over the governor's budget allows them to increase their services to more than 200 additional entrepreneurs. Again, to meet demand at its current level. This also appropriates $100,000 to the Department of Economic Development for the creation of a definitive business resource guide, which was advocated for in their meeting with the small businesses prior to this bill's reading. And the goal for that is to essentially develop a resource, a combination of a website, an annual publication in the form of a magazine, and I believe staff, essentially a director, to facilitate smaller businesses, with people under 20 employees, to access resources and information. $581,000 of that 688 and so on, is for micro business development programs, the Community Action Partnerships Micro Business Development Program. The Going backward a second, section 1, is about limitations. And this essentially includes a statutory change that increases the limit on the total tax credits that can be awarded annually from 3 million to 5 million. It's also included in the governor's budget. Let's see, section 3 goes to the Vermont Arts Council, the Vermont Film and Creative Media Initiative, which is requesting an increase in base funding. Aggregate request of 1,071,800, which is an annual increase of $68,737 to match what they estimate will be the federal grant. But they require the state to match that in order to receive that grant. So that would be that amount in addition to what's included in the governor's budget, I believe. So Senator Brock also brought up that federal funding is currently in question. He wanted to know if there's a contingency plan, if it's even worth continuing to base decisions on that federal funding. Senator Clarkson essentially said that there are people actively working on contingency plans, and they're going to move forward as if that federal funding is established and stable, at least at this point. Because there hasn't been any threats to the source of funding for that particular industry just yet. They're requesting 120,000, I believe, of that goes to the Vermont Art Council for building an online database. This was also discussed when the Vermont Art Council visited the Senate a few weeks ago. That provides infrastructure for the Vermont film industry professionals to reach out, get resources, information, contacts, and includes a staff person who would answer the phone. Senator Brock wants there to be leadership for this initiative. I believe he and Senator Clarkson are agreed that leadership is essential to be included. However, Senator Clarkson said that that will be established more long-term as it progresses and evolves. And she mentioned Film Commission. I don't believe there currently is one based on what she said, but it seems as though that would evolve with this initiative. Section 4 looks at the outdoor recreation businesses and appropriates 250,000 to the Department of Forest, Parks and Recreation to support the Vermont Outdoor Business Alliance's Climate and Circularity Outdoor Business Program. That focuses on providing technical assistance to outdoor businesses, workshops and one-on-one consultations for businesses, and coordinating industry events. I don't believe any of that is currently in the governor's budget. Section 5 looks at the International Trade Office and appropriates 350,000 to the Department of Economic Development for the International Trade Division, which should allow them to hire international recruitment consultants, develop advanced site selection data and mapping tools for investors, and provide events and initiatives for Vermont to service Vermont economic goals. Section 6 amends 10 BSA Statute 537 to include clarifications discussed by Ellen Kaler from the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund. That essentially is to provide clarification for the Vermont training program on who is eligible. Ellen Kaler was asking for clarification on whether owners count as W-2 employees in order to receive the services provided by VTP. Senator Brock posed the question, how does that differ from what the Small Business Association provides? Is it additive or duplicative? Ellen Kaler responded that no, it's able to increase the capacity and focus primarily on businesses with under 20 employees. The SBA also has a capacity limit. It can only take so many at a time, so BTP essentially provides an extra source. And Senator Clarkson asked how many additional programs VTP could take on. They don't have a specific number, but they were able to take on 40 last year. And they want clarification on eligibility for those employers who are working in their businesses actively alongside employees to be able to access the funds and services that VTP provides. Moving on. Sections 7 and 8 address initiating task forces. The first in section 7 is to address business growth and accessing capital. Senator Brock essentially said that there's the one piece that's missing from this task force is someone to represent outside capital. Senator Clarkson agreed they need to have a capital provider on the task force. And the language in that task force proposal needs to be more specific on the state's role in convening and enabling access to capital. Austin Davis, who is the Director of Government Affairs at Lake Champlain Chamber of Commerce, advocated for expanding the mechanism for access to capital, such as, including tax credits, and naming a director to the program recently started called Launch VT, which focuses on scalable entities. So already existing businesses that can provide stable tax revenue for the state. So the committee requested language on that ASAP. And address the idea that the ACCD should be in charge of organizing that task force. They don't have confirmation from the ACCD yet that they would be willing to. So that is something that Senator Clarkson is wary of. She says that seems like a tough ask, but still undetermined. They set a deadline tentatively of November 1st, 2025 for that report. And set essentially the goal of discussing with the ACCD to determine whether that would be taken on by that organization or by legislators. Section 8 regards a task force to explore convention center and performance venue. That was originally conference center, but was changed to convention to avoid confusion with hotels that usually provide conference venues. So essentially there's still some vagueness and some uncertainty around that initiative. They would like to receive more testimony. However, Senator Ron Hinsdale brought up some concerns. Essentially that conversation, the conversation around a convention center, which, may primarily be located in Burlington simply for the reason of proximity to airport, to, a populated area and businesses and things like that. She believes that should be rolled into the conversation around the evolution of the TIP program that's ongoing at the moment. Essentially, because she says that such a project would require the necessary infrastructure. And if they don't combine those two conversations, it'll essentially, I'm not sure quite how to describe it the way she was, but it would not flow together and there would be, he would be essentially trying to address this project without having established the capital or the infrastructure needed. And her point is that she would like to focus on the infrastructure first. And that essentially the role of developing this idea isn't necessarily the committee's role. Senator Chittenden, on his part, sees merit in it. It sounds like they're going to put off voting on it until after town meeting day. Just let it sit for a while. There's no current indication about whether or not that will remain as it is. But there do seem to be some doubts around it. They then discussed,
Just on that point, that when they were talking about convention center, they talk about what UVM has already been doing in that realm. And like they've spent $20 million already and I think they already had steel and stuff, so they may not be aware of what UVM has already started. President here, not over there to stop the project, but
Frank Coffey talking to us about that. Frank was speaking to us about that.
Yeah.
That's the Zoom.
yeah. So they may not be aware of that, but maybe might have to let the chair know about that.
I didn't hear them mention it. Yeah. They did also mention that the possibility of a concert venue could exist outside of the Burlington area. Senator Chittenden sort of threw out Rutland as an idea.
Appreciate that.
But the general consensus is that a convention center would make more sense in the central Burlington area. Moving forward to Bill S-78, which is an act relating to the creation of the Vermont Ireland Trade Commission. They received testimony from Rick Sagel, legislative counsel. This would be the first trade commission in Vermont. And Rick Sagel designed it thinking that there could be more between Vermont and other nations, international. This was passed by the House last session, but was not taken up by the Senate. I believe now they are enthusiastic about taking it up if they can this session. Outlined is that members serve terms of 4 years. I believe there would be 4 members, although I did not see that explicitly stated. A vacancy is designed to be filled within 90 days to avoid vacancies sitting for long periods of time. And the commission would be required to deliver a report on December 1st of each year. Senator Brock did mention that he is not comfortable voting on it with the language that is currently in place regarding how the commission can raise funds through direct solicitation. There was a conversation just around, where is it appropriate for the commission to receive funds from? So Rick Sagel essentially is going to be looking into how this has been played out in other states, language regarding that. Senator Clarkson requested clarification on how the commission would be funded, whether or not it would be housed in the treasurer's office, things like that. The bill is designed to have a sunset in 2030 and is, as of now, designed to be made by October 1st of this year. Briefly after that, the committee discussed crossover game plan. So just to give, it essentially is the same as the overview that I gave earlier, but they are focusing on workforce after crossover. Right now, focus put forth by the committee. And on that note, they moved on to a series of labor proposals. this one, S37, an act relating to unemployment insurance eligibility and benefits, is one that I've talked about and I'm sure you're fairly aware of at this point. But they had testimony from Dave Camper from the Economic Policy Institute. Their goal was to get a perspective on how this similar law has played out in Minnesota in recent years, since I believe 2020 and or a couple years after that. That bill from Minnesota provided summer unemployment benefits for school and support staff. And Dave Camper essentially summarized the effects in Minnesota. In Minnesota, it was mostly bus drivers who took advantage of unemployment insurance during the summer. The cost ended up being a little higher than they expected. In 2023, it was 38.7 million, when they projected it to be 32.8. That is, I mean, for them, that was in terms of net benefit to the employees. So, same thing, different language. They project the net benefit to workers to be 56 million in 2024, or to have been. And it is worth noting that paraprofessionals are included in that law in Minnesota. There's been some question around whether paraeducators would be able to qualify for this. And he also noted that many people don't actually take unemployment insurance for the summer. He went on to discuss projections for how this would play out in Vermont. Net estimated benefits for Vermont would be 5.6 to $8 million. Again, that's in terms of cost to ultimately schools. He says that's about a quarter of Vermont's current annual pre-K through 12 budget. And Vermont, he does note that Vermont unemployment insurance recipiency rate is lower than in Minnesota. So in Vermont, it's 32%. In Minnesota, it's 56%. So I believe the message there is that it would likely cost less, much less in Vermont than it does in Minnesota. They received testimony as well from school staff, Monique Beaudry, an administrative assistant at Woodbury Elementary, who essentially brought to the table the idea of turnover cost, which is something that hasn't been discussed on this issue yet. Senator Clarkson noted that those are two competing financial challenges: the turnover cost to the schools and the potential cost of unemployment insurance to the schools as well. So they don't have numbers on that. They don't have a financial picture of that turnover cost, but essentially that's a cost to families, they said. An instability in the educators and the people who are in their children's lives, as well as parents. Training. So every time there is a turnover, training has to be repeated, things like that. Becky Pellegrini, a paraeducator at Berlin Elementary School, came and noted that she has seen colleagues that work 1 to 3 additional jobs, and she would not be able to live off of her own health insurance due to the amount that she's paid. She wouldn't be able to cover it, so she has to live on her husband's. Mandy Black, a paraeducator at Rutland Public Schools, also brought the idea of the difficulty in retaining experienced staff at schools, given that they often can find a higher paying job somewhere else. And so that turnover rate, again, is high. She says this year alone, at the Rutland Public Schools, they are down 3 paraeducators, and some have also given in their notice. So they're very, very short-staffed there. And that essentially covers the testimony on as 37. Moving on to proposal 25-0654, an act relating to labor relations. This I discussed, I think, last week, and I wasn't 100% clear on the goal of the bill. The proposal essentially gives assistant attorney generals the right to organize in a collective bargaining union. They received testimony from Todd Deloze, the Director of Policy and Legislative Affairs at the AG's office. He believes that there is already a pay parity system in place that solves this problem, making the necessity for a union somewhat obsolete. So that's my word, not his. He also believes that there's a potential conflict of interest there, given that attorneys are required to represent cases that involve unions and employers. Judith Dillon from the Labor Relations Board. I am not sure what part of the proposal she was speaking to specifically. But I believe what she was saying was that a better approach is to fund the Labor Relations Board. Whether that's a better approach to what is currently happening or to the specific problem, I am not 100% sure. But she is asking for more staff, more funds for more staff for the Labor Relations Board to increase efficiency and decrease, I believe, her workload. They discussed also proposal 25-0652 and as well as 25-0653, and those overlapped quite a bit regarding testimony. 25-0652 is an act relating to compensation, workers' compensation, unemployment compensation, and wage requirements for state construction projects. Testimony from Kelly Massicott from the Vermont Association of Justice was supportive of the workers' comp section. That includes including the market value of health insurance in compensation, in workers' compensation. Having the ability to choose a case manager for the employee receiving workers' comp, putting that in the hands of the employee, not the carrier. Providing translation services, having the carrier pay for those translation services for people who are not fluent in English. And for imposing a scalable payment system, scalable penalty system for late payments of workers' comp. She says essentially that including the market value of health insurance and compensation is beneficial to the employee because it is, it's so expensive. Having the choice of a case manager essentially allows that employee to advocate for themselves. I think she used the example of, if she has a client who is low IQ and is receiving workers' comp and needs someone to handle that situation for them, she has the ability to say, this client needs this case manager, as opposed to having to wait for the carrier to provide it. And then, let's see, that timely payment, essentially it's the maximum payment that a carrier would be required to pay if they were late consistently is $29. She says that that is not enough of an incentive. And that the new scalable payment system would increase it by 5% to 10% to 15 to 20 up to 25 for each time that the payment is late. And she has a client who has received 27 late payments, and her point is that if someone is living budget to budget or paycheck to paycheck, they can't afford to not receive those on time, especially with the increase of instant payments, instant withdrawals, I guess, for bills from bank accounts. Megan Sullivan provided contradictory testimony from the Vermont Chamber of Commerce. I believe she said including the market value of health insurance is just not feasible for employers. It would essentially prevent some employers from providing health insurance in the first place due to the high cost, and it would incentivize them to back off and have their employees search for actual market insurance beyond the workplace. Essentially, she believes that employers just can't cover that increase, in addition to the fact that health insurance has, I think, doubled or something like that. And moving forward, another part of one of those bills, it might be 0653, was increasing the wage for incarcerated individuals. Currently, they're paid anywhere between $1.50 and $9 a day for work that they do. I think Senator Ram Hinsdale is particularly in support of this proposal. But Kristen Calver from the Department of Corrections did say that that would essentially increase costs for the department to 8 million plus per year, not including extra employer costs such as taxes or workers' comp. Senator Brock also included that essentially food, shelter, necessary expenses are provided for incarcerated individuals for free. And that is all I have at the moment. Thank you for listening. I'm happy to take any questions you might have. It's very long and very specific, so.
You've been very busy down.
Yeah.
I want to say, I appreciate though, that, you know, you went into that kind of detail. And some of the stuff you're talking about was budget things, which we recently become very familiar with. And so it's, for me anyway, it's good to hear what the Senate is thinking on the other side. To have a sense of, do they support things we do? Do they don't? You know, do they don't? That's a weird phrase. But
That's what I'm thinking.
thank you.
Appreciate it. Just curious, how you did on your test yesterday.
I think I did okay. I
Okay.
did better than I expected.
That's important too.
Thank you for asking.
Did you get a sense on what bills they're gonna try to move before the crossover? Did they? Yeah, well, you said, I think in the beginning, you said the economic development bill, a labor bill, and a housing bill. So those are the three main pieces. Kind of.
And then that bill, S37, they're pretty focused on. I don't know if they really want to get it through yet. But their main focus has been on S37, S78. They're very enthusiastic about that Ireland Trade Commission.
Okay, all right,
And yeah,
thank you.
And the Ireland Trade Commission enthusiasm, and it was a bill, what's subtending the interest in a trade commission specifically with Ireland?
I believe part of it is that Ireland has been very proactive and successful in forming that kind of agreement around the country. I believe it's something that's been going on in other states as well. And it was something that was introduced last session, passed through the House. So I think they're continuing that work.
Did our committee, this committee have any input into that? Well, I'll ask you guys afterwards.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
When are you on break?
For spring break, the week following next week.
It's gonna
Well,
come
we-
to
yeah.
Underhill Town Meeting
Oh,
on
good.
Tuesday.
Right.
Yes.
The horse.
Yep.
Spring it is.
Have a good week off. We won't see you then for a week, so
Thank you.
enjoy your time off. Thank you for your work. We certainly appreciate it. The committee, we're being called to the floor. The vice chair and I will have a meeting with the speaker right after the floor, so he will probably not start probably 11 or so, depending on what time we get off. And we can shoot you a great to let you know.
Yeah.
Okay. Any questions before we